Welcome back to Book Break. Today I'm going to recommend a bunch of books to make you laugh. I have got 11 really funny books written by women to recommend to you today. Starting with a non-fiction, Is This Okay by Harriet Gibson. This is a proper laugh out loud memoir for those of us who grew up in the internet age, and especially for those of us who have found ourselves asking ourselves, is this okay, about some of our worst online behaviour. So the book starts by taking us through Harriet's teenage years growing up alongside the internet, and there's so much in here that will make you so nostalgic. MSN, music forums, MySpace, all of those things that we were so addicted to. From there, it takes us through her really interesting beginnings as a music journalist, just at the time that Twitter was exploding, and then from there through to her motherhood journey and going through IVF. But all of these sections are tied together with this theme of the internet and constant scrolling and constant stalking and constant comparing, and how all of this affects our mental health. So it touches on some pretty serious topics in there, but will keep you laughing the whole way through. And I consider myself a pretty good internet detective. I have scrolled all the way back to the beginning of many an Instagram account in my day, and sometimes accidentally liked the first ever picture. But however good I think I am at it, Harriet Gibson takes internet sleuthing to a whole new level. And if she stops to ask herself, is this okay? The answer would be a big, resounding no. And that is what makes this book so funny. Harriet Gibson is incredibly honest in this book. Caitlin Moran is actually quoted on the back of this book describing it as ill-advisedly honest. That's the levels that we're talking here, and that is what makes this book just the funniest memoir you will read this year. Moving over to fiction, Confessions of a 40-something F Up by Alexandra Potter is another one that people have found just so relatable. This book is now the basis for the new show Not Dead Yet, starring Gina Rodriguez, if you've watched that, and it's got a sequel coming out this summer, More Confessions of a 40-something F Up. And you don't have to be a 40-something yourself to relate to Nell. This book is really for any of us who have found ourselves in a life that maybe wasn't the one that we had planned, whether you have just been through a breakup, or lost your job, or had to move back home after living abroad for a few years, or not had children at a time that you thought that you might have had children, or in Nell's case, all of these things. The writing in this book is truly so funny, and if you listen to the audiobook, it's narrated by Sally Phillips, which, as you can imagine, just makes the whole thing even funnier. But the book is also really heartfelt. It's got a lot of these really emotional moments that so many of us will relate to, and what better way to process complicated feelings than through comedy? I'm throwing in a classic here, but of course Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding had to be on this list. I have already made a video here in Book Break just dedicated to this book and how brilliant it is and how it is just as hilarious today, almost coming up on 30 years after it first came out, than it was on the day it was first released. So I will link below to that video if you want to go and hear all of my thoughts about this book. But in short, I don't even know which element of this book to pick as what makes it so hilarious. It could be the characters are pretty brilliant. Bridget Jones's mother is one of the funniest characters ever put down on the page. If you've seen the movie, you will know, you will have a glimpse of how funny she is, but you get even more of her in the book. So I really recommend that. And the wittiness of the writing, I think, is what makes this book so brilliant and what has made it stand the test of time so well. Helen Fielding has captured in this book the hilarity of what goes through all of our brains on a daily basis, and quite how ridiculous all of us really are when you stop and think about it. That leads me nicely into my next recommendation, Queenie by Candice Carty-Williams, which has had a lot of Bridget Jones comparisons, and the author herself did say that when she started writing the book, that's kind of how she thought of Queenie, and she even came up with this marketing line that Queenie is a black Bridget Jones. But she has also since said that there are huge differences and that Queenie is naturally political in a way that Bridget Jones isn't, and that she has to go through things, for example racism, that Bridget Jones doesn't. So I don't want to go too hard on that comparison, other than to say that fans of Bridget Jones should definitely read Queenie next. Queenie is more darkly funny. The book follows the character of Queenie through a really difficult year as she struggles a lot with her mental health and as a lot of her relationships turn pretty toxic. The character herself is a bit of a nightmare, but endearingly so, and I just loved laughing along with her as she talks to her friends, who are also brilliant characters, about all of her work mishaps and dating disasters. Love Nina by Nina Stibbe is another classic. This one's back to non-fiction. This is a collection of letters that Nina Stibbe wrote home to her family while she was working as a nanny during the 80s. The letters are hilarious, they are self-deprecating, they are sweet, they are funny, and the family that Nina was working for at the time are not only very, very funny themselves, so they make great characters, but were also very well connected, and so you get a lot of cameos throughout the book and really get an insight into the London literary and film scene at the time. And great news for everyone who has already read and loved that book, Nina Stibbe is actually releasing a follow-up this year, a diary this time, Went to London, Took the Dog, which follows Nina's return to London aged 60. And I was really lucky I got the chance to hear her read an extract from it recently, and she had the whole crowd in stitches. For more collections like this, Samantha Irby is a really, really funny writer, and she's got several excellent essay collections, most recently Quietly Hostile. These essays cover everything from therapy to Sex and the City to diarrhea to getting turned away from a restaurant for wearing ugly clothes. They also dive into deeper topics like grief. Samantha Irby can take you instantly from laughing to crying because of quite how open and honest she is about everything, which is the exact same formula that makes the funny parts of the book, which is the majority of the book, quite so funny. My favourite Goodreads review that I read of this essay collection was someone who said that Samantha Irby makes them feel seen for the gross little goblin that they are. Next up, some satire. Disorientation by Elaine Shade Chu is a satirical campus novel that raises really interesting questions about racism, internalised racism, fetishism, liberalism that actually isn't very helpful in dismantling racism. It also raises questions about art and about separating the art from the artist and whether one can do that. So the book gives you a lot to think about. It will make you feel really angry at the world a lot of the time, but keeps you laughing the whole way as you go on that journey. And for more satire, you could go back and read a classic from the 70s, Oreo by Fran Ross, which is a satire about racial identity. The book is about a girl with a black mother and an absent Jewish father, and it follows her on her quest to go and find him. And the book is really playful, even down to the way that it's written. You can see even with the way that the words are laid out on the page, Fran Ross is having fun with this book. It has got more cultural references than an episode of Gilmore Girls. I felt like I got more intelligent just from reading this book. And it's a book that has really gained a cult following over the decades since it was first published. Another classic from the 70s, and fun enough also about a child from a mixed religion family, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret by Judy Blume. This book is so beloved. It was a book I absolutely adored when I was growing up. I've been raving about this one recently on the channel as well. I will link below to a video I made just about this book and why I love it quite so much and why so many of us around the office love it quite so much. But the gist of it is this book captures so perfectly what it feels like to be 11 that when I read and loved this book as a child, I don't think I realised that it was funny. I found this book made me feel seen. It helped me get through so many of the struggles and confusions of being 11, but reading it as an adult, I was cackling at this because Judy Blume has described exactly what the contents of my brain looked like and felt like back then, and in retrospect, all those things that I thought were just so serious were actually hilarious. Judy Blume is such a witty writer. I would really recommend this one for all ages. Another author who writes brilliantly for teens and adults alike is Vibke Brueggemann, author of Love is for Losers. Though I would go a little older than 11 for the youngest age who should maybe be reading this book. I have not laughed quite so hard at a book like this since Angus Thongs and Full Frontal Snogging. Our main character is a girl called Phoebe who is totally fed up with the fact that her best friend has a boyfriend now and has become really boring. It's about the fact that her mother is doing humanitarian work overseas, often quite dangerous work a lot of the time, and how Phoebe is coping with that. It is about the stress of her GCSE year, and through all of this, Phoebe volunteers in a charity shop and makes a really close-knit group of friends there, including Emma, the love interest, who might just change Phoebe's perspective on the fact that love is for losers. This is the Georgia Nicholson series for a modern audience mixed with sex education. It's fantastic. And Vibke Brueggemann does have a new book coming up, Cupid's Revenge, which is all about Tilly, who has developed a crush on her best friend's love of his life, Catherine Cooper Bunting. Going back to books for adults, Dear Mrs. Bird and the rest of the Emmy Lake Chronicles by A.J. Pierce are hilarious in such a charming way. This is a whole series about Emmy Lake and her friends set during the Second World War. The first book, Dear Mrs. Bird, follows Emmy when she first gets a job working for a women's magazine, and she is assisting Mrs. Bird, who writes the Agony Aunt column. Only Mrs. Bird is a formidable woman who refuses to answer any letters that contain what she calls unpleasantness, which means that she's actually not much help to any of these women with their very real problems at all. And so Emmy takes it upon herself, perhaps misguidedly, to secretly start answering some of the letters and trying to help women going through very real problems like unwanted pregnancies, coping with their husbands being sent overseas, infidelity, all of these things that Mrs. Bird would not touch with a barge pole. Given the setting, you will not be surprised to hear that it's also a very moving, often sad book, but it is overall so unrelentingly jolly and optimistic that I have read the whole series so far with a massive smile on my face, and the third book is out this summer. And finally, if we're talking about funny female writers, I had to include Jane Austen. So I've got here Pride and Prejudice, which is taking us perfectly full circle because Pride and Prejudice is the book that Bridget Jones's Diary is based on. Jane Austen's wit is sharp and brutal, and no one is safe. She makes fun of every single one of her characters. Jane Austen is often credited with inventing free indirect speech, which basically means her books are narrated in the third person, but the narrator jumps around and adopts the thoughts and personalities of different characters, which is a really good trick that Jane Austen uses to make fun of people. So for example, the first line of Pride and Prejudice is very famous. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a man in possession of a great fortune must be in want of a wife. I hope I have quoted that right. That sentence is from the perspective of Mrs. Bennet. It is making fun of Mrs. Bennet and her obsession with marrying off all of her daughters. So when you read a book by Jane Austen, you just can't take anything too seriously. Imagine she is writing everything with a wry smile and she is making fun of someone or other at any point. All of her books are so funny, but also so lovely and romantic as well, and that's why they're so beloved. I love every single one, but Pride and Prejudice is a great place to start. So let me know in the comments below if you have any recommendations of your own of really funny books written by women. I will link here to 2 videos I've made in the past of funny books if you're looking for more recommendations to keep you laughing, and I'll see you next time.